before history began, when mushrooms ruled the earth. Long before humans learned to walk upright, before animals crawled onto land, before trees stretched toward the sky, the earth belonged to something far older, quieter, and more powerful than anything we usually imagine. It belonged to fungi, not plants, not animals, but something entirely different, something that worked in silence beneath the surface, shaping the world in ways that would take humanity billions of years to even begin to understand. If you could travel back in time more than 1 billion years, you would not recognize the planet at all. The land would be mostly barren rock. The oceans would be filled with strange, simple life forms. There would be no forests, no grass, no flowers, and certainly no humans. Yet even in this harsh and alien world, fungi were already here, quietly laying the foundation for everything that would come next. Scientists believe that fungi may have been among the very first complex organisms to live on land. At a time when Earth's surface was hostile and unforgiving, fungi possessed a unique ability that no other life form had mastered yet: the power to break down rock. Using chemical processes, early fungi slowly dissolved stone, releasing minerals trapped deep within it. Over unimaginable stretches of time, this process helped create the very first soil. Without fungi, the ground beneath our feet may never have existed. This is one of the most astonishing facts about mushrooms. They did not simply adapt to the world. They helped build it. As the planet changed and life slowly became more complex, fungi formed partnerships that would alter the course of evolution forever. Early plants, struggling to survive on land, lacked roots strong enough to draw nutrients from the soil. Fungi stepped in. They wrapped their thread-like networks, called mycelium, around primitive plant roots, extending their reach deep into the earth. In exchange for sugars from plants, fungi delivered water and minerals. This ancient alliance still exists today, and nearly 90% of all plants on Earth depend on fungi in some way to survive. In other words, every forest, every field, and every garden you have ever seen is standing on a fungal foundation. But mushrooms are only the visible tip of a much larger organism. What we call a mushroom is more like a fruit, briefly appearing to spread spores before vanishing again. The real body of the fungus lives hidden underground, stretching for miles in vast networks that scientists now compare to natural internets. These networks communicate, transport nutrients, and even help plants warn each other of danger. Long before humans invented communication systems, fungi were already doing it beneath our feet. One of the most mind-bending discoveries of modern science is that the largest living organism on Earth is not a whale, a tree, or a dinosaur relic. It is a fungus. In Oregon, a single fungal network covers several square miles and is thousands of years old. It has survived fires, ice ages, and climate shifts, quietly expanding while civilizations rose and fell without ever noticing it. As life evolved and animals began to appear, fungi took on another crucial role: recycling death. When early plants and animals died, their bodies piled up, threatening to trap nutrients forever. Fungi evolved enzymes capable of breaking down tough materials like lignin and cellulose, substances that even today are difficult to decompose. By breaking down the dead, fungi returned nutrients to the ecosystem, allowing life to continue in endless cycles. Without fungi, Earth would be buried under layers of undecomposed remains. In many ways, fungi became the planet's silent custodians, cleaning up the past so the future could exist. Then came catastrophe. Throughout Earth's history, mass extinction events wiped out enormous percentages of life. Asteroid impacts, volcanic eruptions, and extreme climate changes reshaped the planet again and again. During some of these events, especially after the asteroid that ended the age of dinosaurs, fungi may have briefly dominated the Earth. With sunlight blocked and plants struggling to survive, fungi, feeding on dead organic matter, thrived. Some scientists believe there was a period in Earth's history known as a fungal spike, when fungi became one of the most abundant life forms on the planet. In a strange and poetic way, mushrooms may have helped life recover from its darkest moments. As millions of years passed, fungi diversified into countless forms. Some formed delicate, umbrella-shaped mushrooms. Others became molds, yeasts, or microscopic threads invisible to the human eye. Some glowed faintly in the dark. Others developed chemical defenses powerful enough to kill predators or heal them. Even before humans existed, fungi were experimenting with chemistry, evolution, and survival strategies that modern science is still trying to decode. By the time the first humans appeared, mushrooms were already ancient beings. They had witnessed the birth of forests, the rise of animals, and the endless reshaping of continents. To early humans, mushrooms must have seemed mysterious, appearing suddenly after rain and disappearing just as quickly. They didn't grow from seeds. They didn't behave like plants. They seemed to belong to another world. And in a sense, they did. As humans spread across the earth, they began to notice that some mushrooms nourished, some healed, and some killed. Knowledge about fungi became a matter of survival, passed down through generations in stories, warnings, and rituals. Mushrooms entered human history not as simple food, but as symbols of danger, power, and the unknown. This is where our story begins to shift, from the deep, silent time before memory, into the age of civilizations, myths, and written records. Mushrooms were about to step out of the shadows of prehistory and into the human imagination. And humanity would never see them the same way again. Food of the gods, mushrooms in the ancient world. As human societies began to form, settle, and name the world around them, mushrooms remained one of nature's greatest mysteries. They did not behave like crops. They could not be easily controlled. They appeared suddenly, often overnight, as if the earth itself had decided to speak. To ancient people, mushrooms seemed supernatural, born from thunder, rain, and unseen forces beneath the soil. It is no surprise that many early civilizations believed mushrooms were gifts from the gods. In ancient Egypt, mushrooms were considered so sacred that common people were forbidden from eating them. They were believed to grant strength, vitality, and even immortality. Egyptian royalty reserved mushrooms for themselves, viewing them as divine food meant only for those closest to the gods. Hieroglyphs and historical accounts suggest that mushrooms were associated with eternal life, a belief that fit perfectly into a culture obsessed with the afterlife and preservation of the soul. While Egypt guarded mushrooms as sacred treasure, ancient China took a different path. Their mushrooms became medicine. Thousands of years ago, Chinese healers identified certain fungi as powerful tools for balance and longevity. Mushrooms like reishi and shiitake were believed to strengthen the body, calm the spirit, and restore harmony within. In traditional Chinese medicine, mushrooms were not merely remedies for illness. They were seen as allies in maintaining long life and inner balance. Some were so rare that they were worth more than gold, sought by emperors and alchemists searching for the secret of eternal youth. Across Asia, mushrooms became symbols of endurance and resilience. Artists carved them into jade, painted them in scrolls, and wove them into legends. The curved shape of certain mushrooms was said to resemble clouds, linking them to the heavens and the flow of life energy. To this day, mushrooms remain deeply embedded in Asian culture as symbols of health and spiritual strength. In ancient Greece, mushrooms occupied a more complex role. Greek philosophers debated their nature, unsure whether they were plants, animals, or something else entirely. Some believed mushrooms were created by lightning striking the earth, which explained their sudden appearance after storms. Greek warriors were known to consume certain mushrooms before battle, believing they increased strength and stamina. At the same time, Greek physicians warned of poisonous varieties, documenting cases where mushrooms brought swift death instead of nourishment. The Greeks understood one important truth: mushrooms demanded respect. That respect deepened in ancient Rome, where mushrooms were both delicacy and danger. Roman elites prized certain edible mushrooms as luxurious food, serving them at grand feasts. Yet fear always lingered at the table. Poisonous mushrooms were well known, and history records several Roman emperors who met their end through carefully prepared mushroom dishes. Mushrooms became tools of power, capable of feeding an empire or ending a reign in silence. Roman naturalists attempted to classify mushrooms, but without modern science, their efforts were limited. Still, their writings preserved vital knowledge about which fungi nourished and which destroyed. This knowledge would echo through centuries, passed from scholar to scholar, cook to cook, healer to healer. Beyond the great empires, indigenous cultures around the world formed deep relationships with mushrooms. In the forests of Europe, the Americas, and Asia, mushrooms were gathered with rituals, songs, and careful observation. Elders taught the young which mushrooms healed wounds, which could be eaten in times of hunger, and which were never to be touched. These teachings were not written down. They were lived knowledge, carried through generations. In Mesoamerica, mushrooms held especially powerful meaning. Certain species were regarded as sacred, used in ceremonies to connect with the spiritual world. These mushrooms were not treated casually. They were consumed in carefully guided rituals led by respected figures within the community. To these cultures, mushrooms were messengers, bridges between the human world and the realm of spirits and ancestors. Stories from this time describe mushrooms as teachers rather than substances. They were believed to reveal truths, answer questions, and guide individuals through personal or communal challenges. These beliefs survived centuries of change and remain part of cultural memory even today. Meanwhile, in Northern Europe, mushrooms became woven into folklore and myth. Their sudden appearance in circular patterns led to legends of fairy rings, places where supernatural beings danced at night. People believed stepping into these rings could transport someone to another realm or trap them in time. Mushrooms growing near ancient trees or stones were seen as signs of magic at work. Even without understanding biology, ancient people recognized that mushrooms were deeply connected to the unseen processes of the world. They emerged from decay yet produced life. They thrived in darkness yet sustained entire ecosystems. They healed and harmed, nourished and destroyed. As trade routes expanded, knowledge about mushrooms traveled with them. Merchants carried dried fungi across deserts and seas. Healers exchanged recipes and remedies. Cooks experimented, discovering flavors unlike anything else in nature. Slowly, mushrooms spread through cultures, adapting their meanings as they went. Yet for all their value, mushrooms never lost their air of danger. A single mistake could mean death. This dual nature, life-giving and lethal, made mushrooms symbols of wisdom. Only those who truly understood them were safe. In a world without laboratories or microscopes, This understanding came from patience, observation, and respect for nature's rules. By the end of the ancient era, mushrooms had secured a unique place in human culture. They were not just food. They were medicine, myth, weapon, and miracle. They stood at the crossroads of science and spirituality, survival and mystery. As the ancient world faded and new societies rose, this relationship with mushrooms would change. Fear would begin to replace reverence. Knowledge would fragment, and mushrooms, once seen as gifts of the gods, would soon be viewed by many as symbols of danger and darkness. The stage was set for the Middle Ages, a time when mushrooms would be feared, misunderstood, and surrounded by superstition. Between worlds, mushrooms, myth, and the sacred imagination. As humanity moved deeper into symbolic thinking, storytelling, and spiritual belief, mushrooms began to occupy a strange and powerful place in the human imagination. They were no longer just things people ate or avoided. They became signs, symbols, and messengers, objects that seemed to exist between worlds. To ancient and early spiritual cultures, mushrooms were not fully of the earth, nor fully of the heavens. They appeared suddenly, vanished quickly, and resisted easy explanation. This made them perfect vessels for myth. Across many cultures, mushrooms were believed to be born from forces beyond human control. Thunder, lightning, moonlight, and divine breath were all said to bring mushrooms into existence. In regions where mushrooms appeared most dramatically after storms, people believed the sky itself had planted them. This belief reinforced the idea that mushrooms were not ordinary life forms, but expressions of cosmic energy breaking through the surface of the world. In Siberia and parts of Central Asia, certain mushrooms became central to shamanic traditions. Shamans, spiritual leaders and healers, believed that mushrooms allowed them to cross invisible boundaries. These journeys were described not as escapes from reality, but as necessary travels into deeper layers of existence. Through carefully controlled rituals, mushrooms were treated as sacred tools rather than casual objects. They were approached with preparation, intention, and respect. These rituals were never about excess. They were about meaning. Mushrooms were believed to open communication with ancestors, spirits of nature, and guiding forces. The shaman did not use the mushroom. Instead, the mushroom was said to teach the shaman. This language reveals something important about ancient attitudes. Mushrooms were viewed as living entities with their own intelligence and purpose. In Norse mythology, mushrooms may have influenced the legends of berserkers, warriors said to enter trance-like states in battle. While modern interpretations vary, ancient stories describe warriors who fought with unnatural strength, fearlessness, and endurance. Mushrooms growing in northern forests became associated with transformation and altered states of being. Whether literal or symbolic, mushrooms were woven into stories of warriors who stepped beyond ordinary human limits. Meanwhile, in Mesoamerican cultures, mushrooms were deeply sacred. They were often referred to as the flesh of the gods. Unlike other offerings, mushrooms were consumed during ceremonies meant to honor deities, seek guidance, or mark important communal events. These ceremonies were structured and guided, reinforcing the idea that mushrooms were not recreational, but spiritual. Artwork and carvings from these cultures show mushroom-like shapes alongside gods, animals, and celestial symbols. These images suggest that mushrooms were seen as keys, objects that unlocked hidden knowledge. The idea that wisdom could be accessed through nature itself shaped entire belief systems. In ancient India, mushrooms appear more subtly, often hidden within broader spiritual frameworks. Some scholars believe mushrooms influenced early symbolic imagery connected to enlightenment and rebirth. Their sudden emergence from decay, followed by rapid disappearance, made them powerful metaphors for impermanence, a central concept in many Eastern philosophies. Across Europe, mushrooms entered folklore in quieter but equally powerful ways. Fairy tales and rural legends spoke of mushroom circles as enchanted spaces. People believed these rings marked places where time behaved differently, where fairies danced, or where the boundary between the human world and the supernatural grew thin. Farmers warned children never to disturb these rings, not because they understood fungal growth, but because they sensed mushrooms were connected to something unseen. In many of these stories, mushrooms were neither good nor evil. They were neutral forces, mirrors reflecting the intentions of those who encountered them. Those who approached with arrogance were punished. Those who approached with humility were rewarded. This moral framing reinforced the idea that mushrooms demanded respect and understanding. Religious interpretations of mushrooms also appeared. Some early scholars and mystics speculated that mushrooms played roles in foundational religious experiences. While such interpretations remain debated and symbolic, they reflect humanity's ongoing attempt to explain profound experiences through the natural world. Mushrooms, with their mysterious properties and ancient presence, naturally became part of these conversations. What makes mushrooms unique in myth is that they rarely represent domination or conquest. Unlike animals hunted or plants cultivated, mushrooms resisted control. They appeared where and when they chose. This autonomy fascinated ancient people. Mushrooms became symbols of nature's independence, proof that not everything could be tamed by human hands. At the same time, fear grew alongside reverence. Poisonous mushrooms claimed lives, sometimes entire families. Without scientific knowledge, the line between nourishment and death was terrifyingly thin. This danger gave rise to cautionary tales, warnings disguised as myth. Monsters, curses, and dark spirits were often said to dwell within certain mushrooms, reinforcing survival through storytelling. By the end of this era, mushrooms existed in human consciousness as liminal beings, creatures of thresholds. They belonged to life and death, earth and spirit, healing and harm. They were present in rituals, stories, and sacred spaces, yet always slightly beyond comprehension. But as the world shifted toward stricter religious structures and rigid worldviews, there would be less room for mystery. Spiritual curiosity would be replaced by fear of the unknown. Mushrooms, once sacred, would soon become suspicious. The Middle Ages were approaching, and with them came a time when mushrooms would fall from divine status into darkness, blamed for illness, madness, and even evil itself. Shadows and superstition, mushrooms in the Middle Ages. As the ancient world faded and new religious and political systems took hold, humanity's relationship with mushrooms began to change dramatically. The curiosity and reverence of earlier cultures slowly gave way to fear and suspicion. Knowledge that had once been carefully passed through generations fractured and faded. In its place grew superstition, misunderstanding, and anxiety about the natural world. Mushrooms, once symbols of divine connection and hidden wisdom, became associated with danger, darkness, and the unknown. The Middle Ages were a time when survival was uncertain and explanations for illness, famine, and death were often rooted in belief rather than evidence. Science, as we understand it today, did not yet exist. Without microscopes or an understanding of biology, mushrooms were baffling. They appeared without seeds, without warning, and often in places associated with decay. rotting wood, damp cellars, and shadowed forests. To medieval minds, this made mushrooms deeply unsettling. In medieval Europe, mushrooms gained a reputation as untrustworthy life forms. Some were safe to eat, others deadly, and there was no clear way to tell the difference. Entire families could fall ill after consuming the wrong mushroom, reinforcing the belief that fungi were dangerous creations. Over time, people began to avoid mushrooms altogether, especially in regions where famine forced desperate foraging and tragic mistakes followed. This fear was amplified by religious beliefs that framed much of the natural world as a battlefield between good and evil. Anything poorly understood was often suspected of being linked to dark forces. Mushrooms, growing quietly in the shadows, became easy targets. They were sometimes believed to be creations of the devil, sprouting where evil had touched the earth. Certain mushrooms were thought to poison the ground itself, making nearby plants unsafe. The imagery of mushrooms became darker as well. In medieval art and stories, they were often depicted in association with decay, corruption, and misfortune. Poisonous mushrooms, in particular, became symbols of betrayal and death. The idea that something so small and seemingly harmless could kill reinforced the belief that danger often hid in plain sight. During this time, witchcraft accusations began to rise, and mushrooms were drawn into this narrative. Herbalists and healers, many of whom possessed deep knowledge of plants and fungi, were viewed with suspicion. Women, especially, who gathered mushrooms or used them in remedies, risked being accused of practicing forbidden arts. What had once been respected knowledge became dangerous to possess. Fairy tales and folklore from this era reflect these fears. Forests became places of peril. Mushrooms growing in rings were no longer playful signs of fairy dances but ominous warnings. Stepping into such a ring was said to curse travelers or trap them in otherworldly realms. Children were warned never to touch strange mushrooms, not just for safety, but because they were believed to invite supernatural punishment. Despite the fear, mushrooms never fully disappeared from medieval life. In rural communities, especially during times of hunger, people still relied on local knowledge to forage safely. This knowledge survived quietly, passed in whispers rather than writings. Families guarded their understanding closely, knowing that revealing too much could invite suspicion or worse. Monasteries became unlikely guardians of fungal knowledge. Monks, responsible for brewing, baking, and preserving food, worked closely with yeasts and molds, forms of fungi, though they did not yet know it. Bread rose, beer fermented, and cheese aged thanks to fungi, even as mushrooms in forests were feared. This contradiction highlights one of the great ironies of the Middle Ages. Fungi were both essential and distrusted at the same time. Medical understanding of mushrooms during this period was limited and often inaccurate. Some texts warned that mushrooms absorbed poisons from the soil. Others claimed they were inherently cold or corrupt in nature. Still, certain mushrooms continued to be used in folk medicine for wounds and infections, though such practices were rarely written down. The lack of scientific method meant that superstition flourished. One popular belief held that mushrooms growing near rusted metal or snake dens were poisonous. Another claimed that silver would darken when placed near toxic mushrooms. These myths, though incorrect, provided people with a sense of control in a dangerous world. As centuries passed, fear hardened into tradition. Mushrooms became symbols of mistrust, foods of desperation rather than celebration. In some regions, they were called toadstools, reinforcing the idea that they belonged to creatures associated with poison and darkness. Language itself shaped perception. turning mushrooms into objects of caution. Yet even in this age of fear, mushrooms continued doing what they had always done. Beneath the soil, mycelial networks thrived. They decomposed the dead, fed forests, and sustained ecosystems. Unnoticed and uncredited, fungi quietly kept the world alive while humans feared their fruiting bodies. Toward the end of the Middle Ages, something began to shift. Curiosity stirred again. Explorers brought back strange new plants and fungi from distant lands. Scholars questioned old beliefs. The natural world slowly transformed from something to fear into something to study. Mushrooms were about to be seen through a new lens. The age of science was approaching, and with it came the birth of mycology, the study of fungi. The shadows would begin to lift, and mushrooms would step back into the light, not as demons or miracles, but as complex, fascinating organisms worthy of understanding. Seeing the invisible, the birth of mycology. As the Middle Ages gave way to the Renaissance, humanity experienced a quiet but profound transformation. The world was no longer explained only through belief and tradition. Curiosity returned. Observation became valuable again. Scholars began to look closely at nature, not to fear it, but to understand it. And for the first time in history, mushrooms were no longer judged only by superstition. They were studied. This shift did not happen overnight. For centuries, mushrooms had been misunderstood, lumped together with plants, and dismissed as imperfect or degenerate forms of life. Early thinkers believed mushrooms were spontaneous creations, born from decay rather than living organisms with structure and purpose. But as tools improved and minds opened, those assumptions began to crack. The invention of the microscope changed everything. Suddenly, the invisible became visible. Scientists could see tiny structures hidden within mushrooms, spores, filaments, and complex internal patterns. These discoveries challenged the old idea that mushrooms were simple or lesser life forms. Instead, they revealed an intricate organization unlike anything found in plants or animals. One of the earliest breakthroughs came when scientists realized that mushrooms reproduce through spores, not seeds. This single insight shattered centuries of confusion. Mushrooms were not growing from rot or magic. They had a life cycle, just one that unfolded mostly out of sight. The realization that fungi lived most of their lives underground, spreading through fine networks, explained their sudden appearance and disappearance above the surface. As classification systems developed, naturalists struggled to place fungi into existing categories. Mushrooms didn't photosynthesize like plants. They didn't move or consume food like animals. They existed in a category of their own. This confusion would persist for centuries, but it marked an important turning point. Fungi were no longer ignored. During the 17th and 18th centuries, scholars across Europe began documenting mushrooms in detail. They drew careful illustrations, described shapes and textures, and recorded where different species appeared. For the first time, mushrooms were being cataloged systematically. These early mycologists laid the groundwork for everything we know today. One of the most important realizations of this era was that fungi played a vital role in nature. They were not corrupt or unclean. They were recyclers. Scientists began to understand that without fungi, dead matter would accumulate endlessly. Forests would choke under their own remains. Life depended on decay, and decay depended on fungi. This idea was revolutionary. As knowledge spread, fear began to fade. Mushrooms were still dangerous if misunderstood, but they were no longer mysterious threats. They became subjects of study, curiosity, and even admiration. Botanical gardens began including fungi. Universities added fungal research. Books once filled with superstition were slowly replaced with observation-based knowledge. Yet science also revealed something unsettling. Mushrooms were far more powerful than anyone had imagined. Certain fungi produced compounds capable of killing bacteria. Others affected insects in eerie ways, influencing their behavior. Some fungi formed vast underground networks that connected entire ecosystems. The more scientists learned, the clearer it became that fungi were not passive organisms. They were active agents shaping the world. Despite these discoveries, fungi remained overshadowed by plants and animals. Their hidden nature made them easy to overlook. But quietly, researchers continued uncovering their secrets, one species at a time. By the 19th century, the study of fungi had gained a name: mycology. This new field attracted scientists fascinated by organisms that broke all the rules. Mycologists discovered that fungi could survive extreme environments, from frozen tundra to scorching deserts. They learned that fungi could live in partnership with plants, animals, and even humans. Perhaps the most important discovery of this period was the understanding of symbiosis. Scientists finally grasped that fungi and plants were collaborators, not competitors. Tree roots intertwined with fungal networks, exchanging nutrients in an ancient mutual agreement. Forests were not just collections of individual trees, they were communities connected by fungi. This realization transformed how people viewed nature itself. Life was not a series of isolated organisms, but a web of relationships. Mushrooms sat at the center of that web. As the modern era approached, the stage was set for one of the most important fungal discoveries in human history. One that would save millions of lives and permanently change medicine. Mushrooms were about to step out of academic journals and into the heart of human survival. The mushrooms that changed the world. By the early 20th century, humanity had begun to see mushrooms not just as objects of curiosity, but as forces capable of shaping history. Science had peeled back enough layers to reveal that fungi were master chemists, quietly producing compounds that could heal, preserve, and sometimes destroy. What followed would be one of the most important chapters in the relationship between humans and mushrooms, a chapter where fungi directly altered the course of civilization. The most famous moment in this story begins not with intention, but with accident. In 1928, a scientist noticed something strange in his laboratory. A mold had contaminated one of his experiments, and around it, harmful bacteria had stopped growing. This observation led to the discovery of penicillin, the world's first widely used antibiotic. Though penicillin comes from a mold rather than a mushroom, it belongs to the same fungal kingdom, and its impact cannot be overstated. Before antibiotics, simple infections could be fatal. Minor wounds, routine surgeries, and common illnesses claimed countless lives. Penicillin changed that reality almost overnight. During wartime, it saved injured soldiers who would otherwise have died. In hospitals, it transformed medicine from a practice of hope into one of reliability. Millions of lives were saved, all because of a fungus quietly doing what it evolved to do: protect itself from bacterial rivals. This discovery forced humanity to confront a powerful truth. Fungi were not just passive recyclers. They were chemical innovators. As research expanded, scientists found that fungi produced an astonishing range of compounds. Some inhibited bacteria, others targeted parasites. A few even showed potential against serious diseases. Mushrooms that had once been feared or ignored suddenly became priceless resources. Beyond medicine, fungi transformed food and survival. Long before modern science, humans had relied on fungal fermentation without understanding it. Bread, cheese, soy sauce, and fermented beverages all exist because of fungi. In the modern era, scientists finally understood why these processes worked. Yeasts and molds weren't magic. They were living organisms converting sugars, preserving food, and enhancing nutrition. During times of war and scarcity, mushrooms played a quiet but crucial role. They could be grown in small spaces, required few resources, and provided protein and nutrients when other foods were unavailable. In bombed cities and isolated regions, mushroom cultivation became a survival strategy. Mushrooms also found their way into industrial use. Certain fungi could break down waste, clean polluted soil, and digest substances no other organism could touch. Oil spills, toxic chemicals, and agricultural waste all became targets for fungal cleanup. Scientists began exploring fungi as tools for environmental repair long before the public became aware of their potential. One of the strangest discoveries involved fungi that affect insects. Certain mushrooms evolved the ability to influence insect behavior, ensuring the fungus could spread its spores efficiently. While unsettling, these findings fascinated researchers. They revealed that fungi could interact with other organisms in incredibly precise ways, shaping ecosystems from the inside out. By the mid-20th century, mushrooms had entered popular culture again, this time through science and science fiction. Writers imagined vast fungal networks controlling planets or merging minds. While fictional, these ideas were inspired by real discoveries. The more scientists learned, the more mushrooms seemed intelligent, not in a human sense, but in their ability to adapt, communicate, and survive. At the same time, culinary appreciation for mushrooms grew. Chefs began treating them as delicacies rather than last-resort foods. Their deep flavors, textures, and versatility earned them a place in fine dining. Cultivation techniques improved, making mushrooms widely available and safe to consume. Yet even as mushrooms gained respect, much of their power remained hidden. The vast underground networks connecting forests were still poorly understood. The idea that fungi might help trees communicate was only beginning to emerge. By the end of this era, mushrooms had proven themselves indispensable. They healed wounds, fed populations, preserved food, and cleaned environments. They survived alongside humans through wars, disasters, and technological revolutions. But the most astonishing discoveries were still ahead. As technology advanced and researchers gained new tools, mushrooms would reveal abilities so unexpected that they would challenge humanity's understanding of intelligence, sustainability, and the future itself. Beyond imagination, the strangest and most incredible mushroom facts. By the time modern science turned its full attention toward fungi, researchers realized something astonishing. Mushrooms were not just important, they were extraordinary. The deeper scientists looked, the stranger fungi became. Each discovery seemed to rewrite what humans thought they knew about life itself. Mushrooms were no longer background organisms. They were quietly proving themselves to be some of the most advanced and adaptable life forms on Earth. One of the most shocking discoveries was the sheer scale of fungal life. While mushrooms above ground appear small and fragile, their true bodies stretch far beyond human sight. Underground mycelial networks can span miles, forming living systems older than entire civilizations. These networks grow slowly, persistently, and almost invisibly, surviving fires, droughts, and ice ages. When people speak of ancient life, they often imagine fossils. But fungi are not relics of the past. They are still here, still growing, still expanding. Even more surprising is how fungi communicate. Research has shown that fungal networks can transmit signals, sharing information about nutrients, stress, and environmental changes. When one part of a network encounters danger, other parts respond. Trees connected by fungi can receive warnings and adjust their chemistry in response. Forests, once thought to be collections of individual plants, are now understood as cooperative systems linked by fungal threads. This discovery reshaped ecology. It suggested that nature operates less like a battlefield and more like a conversation. Some mushrooms took this strangeness even further by evolving the ability to glow in the dark. Bioluminescent fungi emit a soft greenish light, visible in deep forests at night. For centuries, these glowing mushrooms fueled myths of spirits and enchanted woods. Today, scientists believe the glow helps attract insects that spread spores. What once seemed magical turned out to be a clever survival strategy. Then there are mushrooms with the ability to break down nearly anything. Certain fungi can digest oil, plastic, and toxic waste, materials that resist decay for decades or centuries. These fungi do not see pollution as a problem. They see it as food. This ability has placed mushrooms at the center of environmental research, offering hope for cleaning ecosystems damaged by human activity. Some fungi have even been found thriving in extreme environments. Radiation-filled ruins, frozen tundras, and arid deserts. In one of the most unsettling discoveries, scientists observed fungi growing in areas with high radiation, seemingly using it as an energy source. These findings pushed researchers to reconsider what life requires to survive. Mushrooms also possess remarkable defense systems. Many species produce compounds to deter predators or compete with bacteria. Some of these compounds are toxic, others medicinal. This chemical complexity is why mushrooms have been both feared and revered throughout history. The same kingdom that produces deadly toxins also produces life-saving medicines. Perhaps most fascinating is the way fungi interact with other living beings. Some mushrooms form lifelong partnerships with plants. Others live inside insects, animals, and even humans, influencing health in subtle ways. The idea that humans coexist with fungi internally would have been unthinkable centuries ago. Today, it is accepted science. Fungi have also inspired new ways of thinking about intelligence. While mushrooms do not have brains, they solve problems efficiently. Experiments have shown fungal networks can navigate mazes, optimize resource distribution, and adapt their growth based on past experiences. These behaviors challenge the assumption that intelligence requires a nervous system. In recent years, scientists have looked to mushrooms for inspiration in technology and design. Mycelium-based materials are being developed as sustainable alternatives to plastic, leather, and even building materials. These materials are lightweight, strong, biodegradable, and grown rather than manufactured. Mushrooms, once symbols of decay, are now symbols of innovation. Culturally, mushrooms have experienced a revival. Documentaries, books, and researchers have brought fungi into public awareness. What was once overlooked is now celebrated. People are rediscovering ancient knowledge through modern science, realizing that mushrooms have always been essential partners in life on Earth. Yet despite everything we've learned, scientists estimate that only a small fraction of fungal species have been identified. Millions may still be unknown, growing silently beneath forests, fields, and cities. Each unknown species represents a potential breakthrough, new medicines, new materials, new understanding. Mushrooms remind humanity of something humbling. The world is far more complex than it appears. The most powerful systems are often hidden. The smallest organisms can have the greatest impact. As we step into the modern era, mushrooms are no longer just part of history or science textbooks. They are shaping the future. The modern mycelium age, mushrooms in today's world. As humanity entered the 21st century, a quiet realization began to spread through laboratories, farms, and forests alike. Mushrooms were not relics of the past. They were tools for the future. In an age defined by environmental challenges, resource scarcity, and a search for sustainable solutions, fungi emerged not as a problem to control, but as a partner to work with. Modern science revealed what ancient cultures sensed intuitively. Mushrooms are deeply aligned with balance. In medicine, research into mushrooms expanded far beyond antibiotics. Scientists began studying how certain fungi interact with the immune system, inflammation, and cellular repair. Instead of targeting one problem at a time, mushrooms appeared to support systems holistically. This systems-based approach fit naturally into modern medical research, which increasingly recognized the body as an interconnected whole rather than a collection of isolated parts. Hospitals and universities around the world now study fungal compounds for their potential roles in supporting recovery, resilience, and long-term health. While research continues, one thing is clear: mushrooms offer complexity that synthetic chemistry alone struggles to replicate. In mental health research, scientists began examining how fungi influence perception, learning, and emotional processing, always under controlled clinical conditions. These studies focus not on escape, but on understanding how the brain adapts and heals. The idea that ancient ceremonial knowledge could inform modern therapeutic approaches represents a full-circle moment in human history. Meanwhile, mushrooms have become central to the sustainability movement. Mycelium-based materials are being grown into packaging, insulation, furniture, and even architectural components. Unlike plastics, these materials decompose naturally, returning nutrients to the earth instead of polluting it. Buildings grown from fungal materials can be fire-resistant, lightweight, and surprisingly strong. In fashion, mycelium has inspired alternatives to leather. These materials require fewer resources, produce less waste, and avoid many ethical concerns associated with traditional manufacturing. What once grew unnoticed in soil is now being shaped into the future of design. In agriculture, mushrooms play a vital role in soil health. Farmers increasingly recognize that healthy crops depend on healthy fungal networks. Instead of relying solely on chemicals, modern practices now focus on nurturing natural systems, allowing fungi to improve nutrient absorption, protect roots, and increase resilience against drought. Urban farming has embraced mushrooms as well. They can be grown indoors, require little space, and thrive on agricultural waste. In cities around the world, abandoned buildings and basements are being transformed into mushroom farms, producing food where traditional agriculture cannot. Mushrooms are also reshaping how humans think about waste. Fungi can digest food scraps, paper, and agricultural byproducts, turning waste into nourishment. This ability aligns perfectly with circular economies, where nothing is truly discarded. Mushrooms demonstrate that decay is not an end, but a transformation. In education and culture, mushrooms have entered mainstream awareness. Books, films, and research have shifted public perception. What was once feared or ignored is now appreciated. People are learning that mushrooms are not strange outsiders in the natural world. They are its foundation. Perhaps most importantly, mushrooms have influenced how humans understand connection. The discovery of underground networks linking forests has become a metaphor for human society itself. We are reminded that cooperation often outperforms competition, that survival depends on relationships, and that strength can be quiet and unseen. As climate challenges grow more urgent, fungi offer hope, not through domination of nature, but through collaboration with it. Mushrooms do not fight their environment. They adapt, integrate, and recycle. In doing so, they show humanity a different model for progress. We now stand at a turning point. For the first time in history, humans possess both ancient wisdom and modern science. And at the center of this convergence stands the mushroom, an organism that has waited patiently for us to catch up. The final chapter of this story is still being written. The fungal future, how mushrooms may shape what comes next. As humanity looks toward the future, facing challenges unlike any it has encountered before, mushrooms stand quietly at the edge of possibility. Climate change, environmental degradation, population growth, and resource scarcity demand solutions that are not only effective, but sustainable. In this uncertain landscape, fungi offer something rare, answers rooted in cooperation rather than control. One of the most promising roles for mushrooms lies in climate resilience. Forests, wetlands, and grasslands depend on fungal networks to remain healthy. As climates shift and ecosystems are stressed, fungi help plants adapt by improving water retention, nutrient absorption, and resistance to disease. Protecting fungal biodiversity may become as important as protecting animals and plants themselves. Scientists now understand that restoring ecosystems without fungi is impossible. Reforestation efforts increasingly focus on reintroducing fungal partners alongside trees. Without mycelium in the soil, forests struggle. With it, they thrive. Mushrooms are not accessories to nature, they are its infrastructure. In the realm of space exploration, fungi are emerging as unexpected allies. Researchers are studying mushrooms for their ability to grow in low gravity, recycle waste, and produce food in confined environments. Fungal materials could be grown into shelters, tools, and insulation on distant planets. Instead of transporting heavy building materials across space, future explorers may grow what they need using fungi. Mushrooms also offer insights into adaptive intelligence. Fungal networks respond dynamically to their environment, optimizing pathways and conserving resources. Engineers and computer scientists study these systems to design more efficient networks, from transportation to communication. Mushrooms do not rush. They do not waste. They adapt slowly, but persistently, a model that challenges humanity's obsession with speed. In medicine, the future of fungal research remains vast and largely unexplored. Countless species remain unidentified, each with unique chemistry. Every undiscovered mushroom represents potential breakthroughs in treatment, recovery, and prevention. The next medical revolution may not come from a laboratory synthesis, but from a forest floor. Socially and philosophically, mushrooms invite a shift in worldview. They challenge the idea that strength must be visible, centralized, or aggressive. Fungi succeed through connection, patience, and cooperation. Their networks demonstrate that survival is not about domination but integration. This perspective has profound implications. As societies rethink economic systems, environmental policies, and technological development, mushrooms offer a living example of sustainable balance. They show that progress does not have to destroy what supports it. Even culturally, mushrooms continue to inspire. Artists, architects, and thinkers draw from fungal forms and behaviors. The underground world that once frightened humanity now fascinates it. What was hidden is now celebrated. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about mushrooms is their patience. They have existed for over 1 billion years. They have survived mass extinctions, climate shifts, and the rise and fall of countless species. They are not in a hurry. They wait, adapt, and endure. As humans face the consequences of rapid growth and short-term thinking, fungi stand as teachers from deep time. They remind us that life is cyclical, that decay feeds creation, and that resilience is built slowly. The story of mushrooms is, in many ways, the story of Earth itself. A story of quiet labor beneath the surface, of unseen connections holding everything together. From the ancient world to the modern age, mushrooms have shaped history without demanding attention. Now, at a critical moment in human history, they are finally being seen. And as we look ahead, one thing becomes clear. The future may not belong to those who conquer the world, but to those who learn how to live within it, just as mushrooms always have.